So let's begin with the legal landscape in Canada, which is where your ETF is listed. The federal government intends to legalize recreational marijuana by July. So what does that entail? What needs to happen before then, and what does it mean for your ETF?
Well, there's much like in the U.S., there's different governmental regimes, but federal is the overriding regime. Medical marijuana has been approved for many years now already, right? So we have up and running many medical marijuana producers in Canada, and it's those producers that are really going to be providing the marijuana underlying product to the recreational once it comes online July 1. So it's really the provinces have been given the undertaking to describe how it's going to be distributed at that point. Federally, it had to be approved.
How is the industry structured? Is it vertically integrated, where you have farmers and logistics and retailers, or is it all sort of disparate, different players taking different parts of the value chain?
It really is governmental controlled from that perspective, but you have one entity which has a license to produce, cultivate, and distribute. From there, and then who they distribute it to, right now under medical licenses, they can sell it to the individuals. But once it becomes recreational, like in Ontario, they've already decided they're going to create the Cannabis Control Board of Ontario, much like they already have the Liquor Control Board of Ontario. So they're going to be fixed stores controlled by the province themselves, and that will be the only place that you can buy recreational marijuana.
There's so much interest in this space, and I've seen some quite phenomenal predictions of just how quickly this can grow. What's your sense of sort of assets under management, I think, in this space in particular, even just over the next 12 months, let's say?
Well, I mean, the cannabis sector is on fire.
Yeah.
Right now, I mean, we've raised almost $800 million in the past 8 months.
Right.
Alone, we have several analysts that have predicted that we're going to be well over $1 billion by the end of this month. There was a new ETF that came online in the U.S., which has many of the underlying holdings that we do on December 26th, and that has added a lot of spotlight to the sector, as well as just the California recreational approval discussions have come online as well. And so there's just so much spotlight on an overall basis on the cannabis sector right now. So we have no idea, but we're ready for it.
Optimistic. Bring it to the United States and now, because even in the last week, we've seen far greater uncertainty between the controls now that we have at the federal level and the state level, and how they choose to operate within the confines of what the federal government have now done with retracting the Cole memo and
yes.
the allowances that gave for those that were operating in this space. I mean, just as you look at this now, how do you think that's going to impact the environment? And for institutional investors, I think, particularly looking into this space, doesn't it have a huge chilling effect?
There's a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been gray for a long time, but there's been some definite degrees of white and black. Now, with the retraction of the Cole memo by Mr. Sessions, this government is taking steps to make the black even significantly larger than the white. So California coming online, it's good for Californians, but still, who's going to be distributing it, how the producer's going to make money, how are they going to get it out of the state if they ever wanted to. There's just so many uncertainties. The banks that they have to deal with now, they're dealing with corner store credit unions. They're not dealing with JP Morgans and the Merrill Lynches of the world, right? So much uncertainty.
The companies that are operating in Canada, how much is the U.S. part of their ambition? Like, they want to be players here? Or is it the regulatory framework is still so far apart, and it's going to be so many years before there's convergence that just getting Canada for now is enough?
Well, many of the companies that we are invested in are Canadian-only companies, but they have some minor operations in the U.S., and they've been trying to grow and invest more into the U.S., but they were under the guidelines that the Cole memo was there. They had some comfort with respect to the state laws and the approval of medical or recreational in those states. Now that is all up in the air, right? And like even medical is sort of up in the air, right? It's really a gray area per se as well. And our companies that we're investing in, the Cole memo doesn't affect them because they're really Canadian only. They're Canadian producers. They're active in the medical marijuana space right now, and they're coming online, building up production to be ready for recreational approval in Canada. They're not really that concerned too much about the U.S.
Yeah, they have attracted a lot of attention because it's the way to trade the marijuana industry right now. How much of your investor base is U.S.-based investors counting on that growth to the United States versus those based in Canada?
I can't really talk about who the investors are right now, but I would say primarily the investors in our Canadian ETF are Canadians.
And very quickly, to what extent do you think the Canadians now will benefit from the uncertainty in the United States. If you're a US-based investor and you're like, actually, I really wanted to get involved in this, there's greater certainty in Canada, we'll go there.
Absolutely. You know, I guess there's always existed a regulatory arbitrage when it comes to the ETF industry, though.
Yes.
So Canadians can very easily invest in US ETFs, but Americans cannot invest very easily into Canadian ETFs.
Okay.
That has always existed in the ETF world. So our primarily investor base is Canadians, and the Canadians themselves are very optimistic for the Canadian marijuana as a whole.
Someone should come up with some futures.
Yeah.
Canadian.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's why the growth that we've seen in Canada is why people have such high ambitions for what can be done in the United States.
I mean, just some of the numbers from Colorado and states like that have already approved recreational. It's been astronomical, and the state revenue that's been generated has been great. You know, we see that forecasting into Canada, and we see that as very, very positive for the Canadian companies operating in the recreational space.
Which is why these US states will fight it. Will fight the federal government.
Absolutely.